Hello, and I welcome you to another episode of American Story. I'm your host, Joseph Hyam. In this episode, we'll be exploring the causes and events that led up to the American Revolution. Hello, I'm in downtown Bowling Green at the courthouse. Here around me is the many monuments dedicated to the proud men and women who sacrificed their lives for our freedom. Here you can see monuments from wars such as World War II, World War I, Vietnam, and even Korea. One monument you will not see here is a monument dedicated to the Revolutionary War. That's simply because Ohio wasn't a state yet. As was discussed in an earlier episode, the Ohio Valley and Michigan region were contested land that sparked a war, pitting England and its colonies against the French and its Indian allies in a war that would be known as the French and Indian War. At the end of the French and Indian War, British colonists believed that they had every right to be regarded as full-fledged citizens of the empire. The British, however, had no intention of treating their colonies as equals. As the French and Indian War drew to a close, British traders and land speculators showed increasing interest in the Great Lake regions and the Ohio River Valley. Native Americans in these areas became alarmed, and in 1763 a number of Indian peoples in the Great Lakes region rebelled against the British. Europeans named the uprising Pontiac's Rebellion after one of the Native American leaders. To help restore peace, Britain's King George III issued a proclamation of 1763. This order closed the region west of the Appalachian Mountains to all settlement by colonists. The area, which had just been given up by the French, was placed under the control of the British military. Nevertheless, colonists continued to move west into the Forbidden Territory. The British, meanwhile, had problems of their own, financial problems. Britain had acquired huge debts during the war, and the Parliament now felt that the colonists should pay some of the costs of their own government and defense. The passage of the Sugar Act in 1764 marked the start of a new British policy designed to raise more income from the colonies. To ensure this tax, and others, the Parliament issued a flurry of rules. For example, smuggling cases were now to be tried in the British rather than colonial courts. Under British law, such cases were decided by a judge alone, not by a jury. In addition, judges received a commission on all illegal cargoes and fines, which encouraged them to find accused smugglers guilty. The Quartering Act of 1765 required that the colonies provide housing and supplies for the British troops who remained in America at the French and Indian War. Although colonists complained about these British changes, most went along with them. In March 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act. This law placed a tax on newspaper, legal documents, and most other printed materials. An official government stamp had to appear on these materials to show the tax had been paid. The Stamp Act marked the first time that the British government had taxed the colonists for the clear purpose of raising money. While the Sugar Act was really a way to raise money, too, it had been presented to the American colonists as a way to regulate trade. The colonists' reaction against the Stamp Act was widespread and extreme. In October of 1765, delegates from 9 colonies held what became known as the Stamp Act Congress. The main organizers of the meeting was James Otis of Massachusetts. As early as 1761, Otis had claimed that Britain had no right to force laws on the colonies because the colonists had no representation in the British Parliament. In 1764, he had used the same no taxation without representation argument to protest the Sugar Act. Otis and other delegates now made this argument again in petitions or letters they sent to the King and Parliament. Colonists should have the same rights and liberties that the people of Great Britain enjoyed, the delegates argued. In addition, colonial merchants and others organized a boycott of British goods. Groups known as the Sons of Liberty and the Daughters of Liberty sprang up to enforce the boycott and to resist British policy in other ways. By November 1765, when the Stamp Act was to take effect, most stamp distributors had resigned or fled, leaving no one to sell the stamps. In Britain, merchants also protested, as the colonists' boycott threatened their profitable trade with America. Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in March 1766. However, in 1767, Parliament reasserted its authority by passing the Townshend Act, which placed duties on certain imported goods, including glass and tea. The protests and violence began again. Trade duties were just as unacceptable to the colonists as direct taxes. Either way, the colonists were being taxed without their consent. Either way, Britain would use the money for the salaries of royal governors in America, who then would not have to turn to the colonial legislation for their pay. This change would weaken the legislature and undermine the self-governance of the colonies. The growing hostility between the colonists and the British soon erupted into violence. In Boston, on the evening of March 5, 1770, an unruly crowd threatened a squad of British soldiers. The soldiers opened fire, leaving an African American named Crispus Attucks and 4 other colonists dead or dying in the snow. The incident, which became known as the Boston Massacre, added to an already tense situation. Soon after the Boston Massacre, Parliament canceled the Townshend taxes. It kept only the duties on tea as a reminder of its authority over the colonies. While life in the colonies generally quieted down, soon colonists continued to organize. In 1772, Samuel Adams, James Otis, and other Bostonians formed a committee of correspondence to coordinate resistance throughout the colonies. By 1774, nearly all the colonists had such committees. In May 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, which gave the British East India Company the right to sell its tea in America without paying the normal taxes. Colonists had been smuggling much of their tea in order to avoid paying these taxes. The Tea Act would make the British East India Company tea even less expensive than smuggled tea, thereby driving the American tea merchants out of the business. Colonists, especially tea merchants, protested, and several colonial port cities refused to let ships carrying the tea dock in their harbors. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Indians boarded 3 tea ships in Boston and threw the tea into the harbor. This act of protest became known as the Boston Tea Party. Committees of correspondence in several colonies called for a meeting to plan a united response to the Intolerable Acts. On September 5, 1774, the First Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. The 56 delegates came from every colony but Georgia, and they had a wide range of viewpoints. The First Continental Congress agreed to boycott English goods and call on the people to arm themselves and form militias. At the same time, the delegates made a direct appeal to the king. The foundation of English liberty and of all free government is the right of the people to participate in the legislative council, and as the English colonists are not represented and cannot properly be represented in the British Parliament, they are entitled to a free and exclusive power of legislation in their several provincial legislatures, where their rights of representation can alone be preserved. On October 26, the Congress ended, though its members vowed to meet again in the spring if the crisis was not resolved. However, George III remained stubborn and firm. On November 18, he wrote, "The New England colonies are in a state of rebellion. Blows must decide." I'd like to thank you for watching this episode of American Story. On our next episode, we'll be exploring the shot heard around the world and the tragedies and triumphs of the American Revolution.